to England to study in 1912, and essentially spent his philosophical career in England, although for a space of some 20 years he went back to Austria and stayed there. I want to turn to Wittgenstein at this stage, however, in going back to what we were saying about Bertrand Russell. Russell, in continuity with the 19th century empiricists, particularly John Stuart Mill, those empiricists and their attention to objective, empirical, scientific knowledge, as expressed in the hypothetico-deductive method, that is to say, scientific explanations have the structure of a deductive system based on, for their premises, broad general hypotheses, okay? And so the hypothetico-deductive method, which in Russell comes through in his logical atomism, his attempt to analyze what we purportedly know into its logical constituents and to organize those logical constituents into a deductive system, adducing whatever would be the necessary premises as the hypotheses for that. So the hypothetico-deductive method, and of course the universal extension of this scientific method. And we saw the way that was the case in Russell, since he wants this method to be the method of all philosophy, of all human knowledge, of all science. Now, in other words, this movement of 19th century philosophy into the Russell of the early 20th century represents the kind of scientism, as it's called, which counts scientific method as the only acceptable method for giving us reliable knowledge. That sort of scientism. And it is this which then comes through in Wittgenstein, and I have to add the early Wittgenstein, the Wittgenstein of the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. The later Wittgenstein, represented by his book Philosophical Investigations, is different, and we'll be looking at him next week. But the early Wittgenstein follows Russell in this regard, as does the logical positivism of the 1930s and 1940s. The sort of position represented by A.J. Ayer, though he moderates the appeal to science and hypothetico-deductive method in some ways. Okay, so keep that framework in mind. And let me give to you an outline that I want to make some comments on, of some stuff in his Tractatus. One of the interesting things, and I'll refer you to it in a few moments, is that Russell wrote the introduction to the Tractatus. There we go. And whether or not this was Wittgenstein's intention, Russell's introduction seems to seems to say that what Wittgenstein is doing is what Russell himself had held out for in his logical atomism. What actually Russell says in the preface is that the book starts with the relationship between words and things, showing how traditional philosophy arises out of ignorance and the misuse of language. Now that's a theme that runs through the positivists, runs through Wittgenstein, both early and late, you see, and one which Russell certainly agrees with. Remember the title of that work of his, Mysticism and Logic, in which he was criticizing the idealists. Russell goes on to say that what we need, because of the misuse of language, what we need, says Russell, is an ideal language. Not an actual language, not any ordinary language, but an ideal language, one in which every name, every noun, refers to just one fact, so that no word ever can be used to refer to two different things. Eliminate ambiguity. Eliminate double reference. Eliminate connotations that would be misleading. Okay? A strictly logical language in which the atomic facts are described simply by atomic propositions. You remember Russell's line in that regard. Now, Russell says that this is what Wittgenstein is doing. Well, let's see. In his own preface to the book, this is what Wittgenstein says. The book deals with the problems of philosophy. You might have difficulty identifying what they are as you read it, but he says it deals with the problems of philosophy, and shows that the reason why these problems are posed is that the logic of our language is misunderstood. The logic of our language. Now, what's he mean by logic in the sense of the logic of language? Obviously, he's not referring to deductive syllogisms. That's not the logic of language. He's not referring to inductive reasoning. That's not the logic of language. He's referring to the logical structure of language, the logical form that it has, subject, predicate form, particularly, such that subject, predicate form of propositions asserts facts, okay, asserts facts. Words, which are signs, names, don't assert anything. So that if I were to come into the room and simply say, brown, house, a few other isolated words, you'd think I was wacky, because I'm just not asserting anything. I'm not stating facts. All I'm doing, but certainly not in this. So he says the reason why the problems of philosophy are misunderstood, opposed at all, is that the logic of language, the logical use of language, is misunderstood. And so the whole sense of this book can be summed up in the following words, and he comes back to them on the last page of the book. What can be said at all can be said clearly. What we cannot talk about clearly, we must pass over in silence. In other words, put up or shut up. Well, the aim of the book then is to stake out the limitations of what language can say and show us how it says it. It's a book about the logic of language. Okay? Now, with that in mind, I think you can make some sense of this outline that I've given you. The numbers in the left column come from the numbering of paragraphs in the text. So that his first statement is 1. The next is 1.1. The typist put 1-1 rather than 1.1. Misunderstanding. Not surprising, since it's an unusual format. Okay. Now, sometimes you get a whole paragraph by such a number, sometimes just a sentence. It seems to be a reflection of the way the man not only wrote, but taught. It's said that he would thin out the people who were registering for his courses so he'd have half a dozen people that he wanted. And they would meet in his rooms there at Cambridge, where the professors have their own living accommodations. Meet there in his rooms. And he habitually would sit astride a hard-backed chair with his arms on the front of the chair, deep in thought, and would utter some sentence and expect people in the seminar to further the discussion, often with long pauses waiting for people like David to speak up, you see. All sorts of tales are told about this mysterious character and the way he handled. But notice what he's saying. All that is the case. The world is the totality of facts, not of things. Now, there's a distinction that's new between facts and things. What does he mean? A fact is the existence of a state of affairs. Okay? So a fact is likely to be complex. There can be molecular facts. There can be atomic facts. There's Russell. Okay? There can be molecular facts. There can be atomic facts. A fact is the existence of states of affairs. States of affairs are combinations of objects or things. So things are simply constituents of states of affairs. Now notice what's happening. His point is that words name things. Okay? Words name things. That words are constituents of, take it back, that things are constituents of states of affairs. It's facts that are states of affairs. Now, the thing pertinent to the confusion of language is that one word can be used to name many different things. One of his examples is green